Thank you for joining us. I'm joined today with Ewelina, who's going to talk to us a little bit about her background. So, Ewelina, once again, thanks for joining us. Please, can you introduce yourself?
Thank you for the invitation. So I'm Ewelina Kurtys. I am a scientist by background. So I have done my PhD in neuroscience, and I was studying the effect of nutrition on brain. So that was very fascinating field. And after a few years in academia, I moved to industry, and I completely changed my field. I moved to technology. I discover all the amazing things which you can do with technology and become fascinated with that. And I started to work with the small companies to learn what they are doing and what can be done with innovation, with technology. I also wanted to learn coding myself because I was so fascinated with that. But after some experience, I realized it's much easier to find other engineer, which is great at coding, than to learn yourself everything and do everything by yourself. So I decided that I stick to, I'm much better as a scientist than engineer. So it's better to work with other people, but still I'm very fascinated with technology and all the possibilities which can bring and how it can change our life. And this also led me to to work on a startup idea. So I'm also since few months working on a startup which is in mental health area. It's very early stage, so I have nothing yet to present about this. But this is very interesting, innovative project in the mental health, which I hope will be very useful for future users.
I think that it's an area which definitely needs more help and support. Certainly, I've
Definitely.
seen just anecdotally from the people that I interact with,
Mhm.
there's been a massive downturn in just general mental health with all of the challenges with being in lockdowns and everything else that's
Absolutely.
going on. It just feels like we're in a bit of a mental health crisis at the moment. And without oversharing, I've got my challenges and issues too. So like many
Mhm.
of us, right? I think we've become more aware of the needs of looking after our mental health as well as our physical health. I was also really interested with the idea of the impact of nutrition on your brain. Um,
Yes.
I was reading your post about keto diets. So I
Yeah.
struggled for a long time with weight loss. I'm actually half the size that I used to be. I used to be really quite large.
Oh, it
One,
makes sense. So it's
yeah, I think we could go off in a really interesting direction talking about that. I'm not shy about it. I had a gastric bypass to reverse type 2 diabetes because I tried many diets and things. And the interesting thing I found about keto was I did feel more alert and more aware when I was on a keto diet, when I was in that space. So it's really interesting those insights. Obviously, I can only talk about it as a layperson. You've got the science and the experience behind it. Um, but yeah, super interesting. So what are you like really fired up about at the moment? Is there anything that's really kind of front of mind for you at the moment?
well, I have a lot of challenges. Actually, I'm working. So actually, I am working in two areas. So as I said, it's always technology. So I work a lot in business development and marketing. So my thinking is always how to answer questions for which I don't know the answer, how to explore new territories for other people and also for myself for my own startup. There is always questions about how to make technology useful.
Yeah.
For example, that's one, but it's very general question. How to navigate, how to make it, because there is many things we can do technically, but there is always a challenge how to focus on the right problems and how to make it useful for the people. So that's always the challenge which I'm thinking about.
I think it was really interesting. It ties me back to a couple of the blog posts and the video that you'd uploaded. So it was like one of the blog posts, and I'd encourage people. I'll actually put a link to your blogs, but I'd encourage people to go and read those. But it was one about the idea of focusing on your area rather than the entire playing field. So having
Oh
that kind of
yeah, yes.
focus.
Yes, I
So
think it's a very good. No, yeah, absolutely. So you should focus on what you understand, definitely. And yes, and it's always, Yes, I think it's just more healthy when we come back to the mental health.
Hmm.
We try to, like, I don't know, think about whole world. It's just overwhelming, and there will be always a lot of things you cannot change, and it's just totally outside of your control. So I think it can also negatively impact everything, and it's just not productive to focus too much on things you cannot change and you are far away from you. So that's why it's best always, yes, to focus on your own projects, think on what you can do to make things better, and that's just more healthy, and it's also a much more fulfilling approach, because you have really chance to change something if
Yeah.
you focus on what you are doing and not on some faraway things which just outside your impact.
Yeah, we often talk about in my domain the idea that there are things that you can actually control, and they're things that you can own and affect an outcome for. The next kind of layer out on that circle is things that you can influence. So there are people you can talk to, and you can maybe influence a change. And there are things that are just outside your influence. I'm trying to be a little bit more kind of stoic in the way that I live my life,
Yes.
and really just try and push out some of that noise. The things that I can't control or influence, there's very little benefit in me worrying about the weather, right? For example, I can control my reaction to it, take an umbrella or wear sunscreen or whatever, but I can't control it. So why sit and stress over those things that you've got no control over? I think the challenge that people face is actually characterizing those things and understanding that's something I don't actually control, and therefore an investment of my time is not really that beneficial.
Absolutely.
I think
Yes.
that also brings us to that video that you uploaded, which was talking about intrinsic motivation, which I'm a big fan of. I will get the pronunciation wrong. Please feel free to correct me if you know. But Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, who talks about flow. I don't know if you've read his book, but he talks about this kind of. So he was talking about things like sportsmen and stuff like that, who are, when they're in this period of intense focus, everything else just kind of slips away. They have this intrinsic motivation to do
Yes.
great in their space, in their domain, and everything outside of that goes away. I often speak with engineers who they go, oh no, I was sitting there writing code for 8 hours, and then I realized I hadn't drunk anything, I hadn't been to the bathroom, because I was just in the zone. And finding that space where you can just be really super engaged is really important, I think.
Yes, absolutely agree with you. And it's also just more productive again when you do something what you really like, what you would do even if you wouldn't need money. Yes, I think it's very, very important, and it's worth to search for these kind of things, because there is a lot of choice always, and you can always change a job, or whatever you are doing. So I think it's good to search and put time on this and be selective and just to do something what you really enjoy.
Yeah.
Yes. So I think engineering is a great experience. I don't enjoy coding as much as engineers, but I can
Me too.
imagine some people really love this. And it's just example of a work you can dive into, some very complex topics. It's also for a scientist. Often when you are exploring some scientific problems, you can also, dive deeply, and it's fascinating, and you just enjoy the experience of, doing this and exploring, and not thinking so much about the outcomes, or if it makes impression on other people, or whatever, but just you do this for pleasure. That's, I think, it's always good to search for such a things to do, and then they can also be useful. Yes, so uh, things which we enjoy can be useful, but it's just we have to find them.
Yes, I mean, I'm really lucky that I absolutely love the work that I do. So helping organisations to really kind of connect with their customers and their users, but not just to connect with them, but for competitive advantage, for giving them the fuel to do great things in the future. So I absolutely love what I do. I was hoping we could pivot a little bit, because your background in kind of hard science, being a scientist, is something which I've got high school levels of understanding of, but it's one of the things that I'm trying to encourage organizations to embrace, is to have those hypotheses, to test them in an effective way safely,
Yes.
and to guide. But maybe there's some value you can provide in sharing, kind of your view of that scientific method, and how it can be beneficial for real problem solving.
Yes, so I love this approach. Yes, it's true. As a scientist, I actually implement this in other areas as well. It seems to be natural, but I think, of course, this is this is something what everyone can do. That you just follow the reasoning, and this is why it's very important, to understand what you are doing. Always, of course, maybe it's obvious for some people, but maybe not always. And you have to try to understand what you do and follow the reasoning, so you can have some hypotheses about things you don't exactly know, but which are not too far away from what you know.
Yeah.
Because when you go too far, if you, I don't know, try to do some physics tomorrow, yes, that would be very hard. I wouldn't do this. So it's also important not to go too far with your hypothesis, because this is exactly how science also works. Yes, that you kind of like push the boundaries, but you are always on the edge. But that's, you don't go too far from what you know. So you always use the methods, you use some knowledge which is kind of already confirmed, and based on that you try to go, you try to move one step forward, but it cannot be too fast also, because then you can get lost. It's very chaotic if you don't understand anything. But I think it's a really great approach um, in some projects when you have to explore.
Yeah.
So I think it really depends, because maybe some methods, some I can imagine, some things are you can make a plan for the whole project sometimes, maybe. So it really depends, I think, on the type of the project. But
Yeah.
because this approach makes sense for exploratory projects, something new. Maybe when you develop new product, for example, you don't know exactly how it should look like, so you need a lot of iteration. Maybe with potential customers, this is something you don't know. So you make hypotheses how it should look like, then you test this with users, and then you go back. So this makes sense maybe in this kind of situation.
Yeah, we'd often say that, or I would often say, certainly, I can't speak for an entire community of people, but there are things that we've done before and we've got a fair idea how to do them. Right, this is the space where we can create this kind of long-term plan to iterate and build. Right, we know how to build large-scale infrastructure, bridges and buildings. Right,
Yes,
we can
yes,
follow a plan for doing that. If we're trying to do something which is breaking new ground, that's the space where we need to have those hypotheses,
yes,
create
exactly.
create a test and use the data from that testing to
Hmm.
validate or not validate our hypothesis and pivot and change. And that's what we would call maybe agile development. It's to kind of create these small stepping stones where we test and learn and then fold that learning back in, because it reduces our risk of making kind of poor decisions sometimes.
Absolutely agree with you. But then it's also very important to how you evaluate. So that's also a problem for a scientist. Exactly the same always when you design a new experiment, you have to think about how you will prove that it really works. Statistics is also a big challenge, because there is a lot of, sometimes you can play with the data, then you don't really get the true answer. So this is always a big challenge on how you evaluate your work, the outcome, and how you make sure that the conclusion you make is actually close to true.
So
So it's always a challenge.
yeah,
Yeah.
I suspect you need to be mindful of any cognitive biases at multiple
Oh
levels,
yes,
right? So
for sure, absolutely. So I believe you have to look at the data, but also just to think about which kind of data, which kind of metrics really tell you what you should, what you want to know. So this is, I think, challenging, because the science is always based, okay, on the data, on the reasoning, not the feelings. So it's always, I believe, it's always best to try to focus on the facts, not to get biased, as you said, by many things which are not rigorous thinking. So this is very dangerous.
so when you're forming a hypothesis as a scientist, are there any kind of tips and tricks you might use to make sure that that was a valid hypothesis? Is it like sharing it, peer review, or is there any other ways that you can make sure that you've got both a sound hypothesis and a sound analysis of your feedback?
I would say in science there are no tricks for sure, and unfortunately, it's just a hard work. I would say there are two components. So one is you have to just work on your reasoning. So it's good to study some basic science like mathematics, biology, but really basics, just to understand how things work on the ground, and just make sure that you can follow logic reasoning. That's extremely important, and this is what you learn in at least in this type of science, biomedical or engineering, this kind. Then you have to be very rigid in following the reasoning. That's one thing. And then if you focus on some particular topic, you just have to try to understand everything what is available on the particular topic. Of course, this is it's not possible, especially now, to read all the literature because there is too much information. Even if you focus on your scientific publication on any topic you choose, you have extreme amount of information, so you have to be able to select this, and then try to understand as much as possible about what is currently understood about the topic, and then what could be the step forward.
I'm
What
just
is, what is missing in what is what could be the next step, closest to what is known at the moment.
Yeah, I think when you're picking the sources of information to draw from, I
Yes,
recognize that quite often you've got like a count of the amount of times that a paper has been cited as an example, as a maybe a good measure of this. But for I guess my layperson's reasoning is there could be breakthroughs in other areas which are maybe not as broadly cited or used. So do you try and pick a mix of these papers who've got like 1,000 citations, and then maybe look at the kind of edge cases where one or two people may have cited a paper, or do you generally kind of discard those papers where they're not quite as often? It doesn't have to be from citations. I'm sure there are other ways you may select your source material.
oh, this is a very tricky question. I think, when you read papers of other people, it's a really huge area. And there is always, it's not about scientific paper, because if you search for information about anything else, it's actually the same problem. And I think what really helps you just to have to see the quality of reasoning. You just see when you read anything, and it's not only the papers, but also books or articles, whatever. You just see. I think if it has a value, you can judge yourself. If
Well,
it has a value.
yeah.
But
Hopefully,
I
oh, go on,
wouldn't,
sorry.
when and of course, if you are really like focusing on the specific scientific topic, okay, you can also know which kind of journals are good, that they should be maybe reviewed by others. That really helps. But I think what is the best is just to use your own filters. You search for information and you just can see if it's reliable or not, just by reading.
Cool. I'm hoping that this conversation becomes a resource that my community can use as a resource to make their decision on. I
Yes,
think that's
very
awesome.
difficult actually, because sorry that because it's actually generally there is too much information, on the internet. If you want to Google any kind of topic, it's always the selection of information is very very tricky, because there can be too much information. So it's also important, when you focus on something specific, it's also of course very important how you choose the keywords, what actually you're searching for. You have to know what you're searching and where you can find it. So also just understanding maybe what is the core of the topic. This is really tricky. I would not say it's easy to navigate, because there's too much information available. But what is also another thing I have to add is also talking to people is actually this is super helpful, and you should never solve difficult problems by yourself, especially if it requires some knowledge, from other fields, multidisciplinary project. It's always great to talk to other experts, and they can also guide you, because it's very very difficult to do everything by yourself. So
So
it's better to talk to experts.
that's great. So we've gone through a few things there about how do you kind of form a hypothesis, how do you gather data.
Yes,
When it comes to the other side of that, you've created your hypothesis. You've got a thought in your head about, well, this could be something interesting. How do you then maybe go about validating the results of any tests that you do in that space? Are there some good principles there that you can think of?
Well, I think it really depends on the problem specific.
Yeah.
So in science, it's just again, it's the matter of metrics, which kind of metrics you choose to measure if what you believe works or not. So I think it's the matter of metrics, and yes, that's what I would say. How you
No.
validate.
So I think from
So
our
I think in the
yeah.
software, I don't know, you can see if it just works or not. Or if you have machine learning model, it just, I think you just have to know, what you are searching for, and then choose the right metrics to measure this.
Yeah, so in my world, we're often talking about products or services that we
Yeah.
provide to customers. And for me, one of the key measures and metrics is what my customers or users actually feel about that product. So are they using it? Are they getting the benefit? So this is the closing of that feedback loop. We'll often talk about it in terms of bets rather than hypothesis. I'm going to make a bet that if I make this functional feature, it will provide value to my customers and consumers, which
Yeah.
will then increase my revenue or my market standing or open up a new market area for me. So it's about kind of there are different levels of value, right? So I can gauge my value on whether the tests pass. I can gauge my value on whether internally we think this is a good product or service. But ultimately, what really counts is, are the customers using it and
Absolutely.
loving
So
it?
I fully agree with you. I think at the end, it's just the market will show you if it works or not. That's just a metric, yes. If there are users, so for any kind of like product, which is, then whether people are using this or not, and whether they pay for this or not, that's really what you want to know. Because I think this is the truth. Because the opinion can be, it doesn't really always work. What really works is the reality. It's just people using or not. So
Yeah.
I think it's good to focus on this. What really matters, not too many metrics, maybe in between, which can just. So as faster you get to the final metric, the better. This is what really matters. So the feedback from the customer or the revenue, if they are willing to pay for this, that's I think it's much more useful.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think we're living in a world where opinion maybe gets more weight than it should in some
Yes,
cases.
I totally agree with you, because that's also in science. You measure something, it either works or not. And opinion, I also have seen this from my experience, that it's also, it's good to have some humility, because there are many things we don't know, and and the world is very complex. So I would be very careful with opinions. It's just the best to look at the facts, what is working, what it doesn't work, and in practice, of course, not based on the opinions.
Yeah, I think um, in my experience, lots of people kind of they really do confuse those two things.
Yeah,
It's
definitely.
disrespectful to disregard my opinion. No, I love the fact that you've got an opinion, but it may not be fact. Same as my opinion may not be fact. But we can respect each other's opinions, but let's not confuse the two. So I
No,
think
it's
it's
always
true.
to listen, to other people experience opinions. It's always enriching, but it's always good to see the difference. That is just opinion. You never know. You have to always test
Yeah.
what is what.
So, what do you think is going to be kind of emerging in your space? Because I've seen some of your posts have been around kind of an interest in kind of language learning and AI space. And I'm really intrigued by AI, and I was looking at the GPT-3 models and the recent news from Amazon about, well, is the Lambda model a sentient being? I think we're getting some very interesting work going on now in language models. Is that something you're still actively kind of intrigued by and enjoying?
Yes, I'm very fascinated. I've seen some progress in this field. And I think, like image processing is kind of like we have a lot of good algorithms for this. So now it's mainly problem of the data accessibility. If you want to have a new product related to image processing, it's more the data than the than the algorithm. But I believe, okay, from my scientific point of view, of course, I'm not an engineer, so I don't do any R&D on text analysis. But I think here there is still something to be done for the algorithm development. So that's you still can just push the technology. So it's not only about the data. Like in imaging, I believe, but it's my superficial opinion. Of course, I don't know everything, but also by talking with experts, that I think that most of the problems related to image analysis, it's the data problem, not the algorithm, because you have a lot of methods now. And actually, the biggest problem at the moment maybe is more the also computation, because it's just this models can be very huge. It just takes a lot of computation and access to data. When it text analysis, maybe there is still something we can improve, how to make it more natural, because this is extremely difficult, of course, to have any kind of like conversation with artificial AI. I think this is not yet achieved, and there is still something to be done.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting area. I just wonder what its practical implications or applications, maybe is a better word, will be as we move forward. I can see a world where, well, we were talking there about forming hypotheses and things like that, using AI to try and to drive out some of the cognitive biases we may put into our formations would be really interesting, right? Because as you said, right, I can create a Google search, but if I search for how do I prove this is true, then the algorithms will feed me the answers that I'm looking for, not necessarily the answers that I need. So it'd be interesting to see if we can get less bias coming in by using AI to reformulate questions. That'd be quite interesting.
Yes, but I think it's also very difficult because the bias which we have, it's also reflected in the models we built, which was shown already with imaging. That because at the end you create AI, it's not it's not like a human, another entity, but it's actually you create this software, and how it will look like, it will all depends on your design. So if people are biased, then I think models also will be like, for example, for text analysis, it the way how AI will process it will depends also on the quality or the content which you put in the model. So I
It's
think it's
quite I think it's quite interesting. So as those models mature, if we're feeding it with language from potentially billions of individual sources, so
yeah,
it's got access to a wealth of language to build its models from as it learns. We actually may well get to a space where the AI is just a mirror of our of humanity, which actually
absolutely.
we're going in a very strange direction here, but I think that's quite an interesting view. So that AI may actually give us a better picture of who we are as a species rather than individuals. I think it's a really interesting area.
Yes, it's true. But yes, I fully agree with you. But also, like, if we are biased, then AI will also be biased. So it's very, very hard. We have to like maybe depend kind of control which kind of data you put in the model. So this is always tricky. Always tricky.
So coming back to the kind of the world of business now, as you said, you moved out of being kind of directly in academia and focusing on that academia stuff directly to being more kind of in the business world. What did you do, or were there any differences that you noticed in making that transition from academia to business? What were the biggest challenges?
This is a very interesting question. I think yes, in academia you mainly follow the reasoning, and that's just enough. But in business, I see this is not enough. Definitely, I think you need to develop interpersonal skills. That's all what you need. When you move from industry to any kind of industry setting, it's all about communication with other people. So I think this is the biggest thing. How to talk to everyone, or maybe just everything about communication, I would say.
Yeah. So
Problems are not very hard. I would say it's more about actually all the interpersonal um, communication, how to deal with people, because it's always about people. You will never do anything by yourself. no matter what you do. If it's just a little project or whatever you would like to do, you will always need other people. So you need to know which kind of people, and how to work with them. So that's, I think, this is the biggest difference, because I would say research is much more individual work. I mean, it's also, there are teams, but it's very different. I think a lot of things you can do just on your own, and I think scientists are very often, which is also very nice actually, yes, because you can spend many hours on the lab, just working on your project. This is also very interesting, but it's very individual work, much more than anything in industry.
Yeah, I think one of the key things that I've learned, and I've got, I guess, quite an engineering mindset. My background is in test and engineering. I'm not a developer or a coder, but I've got an
Yeah.
engineering background, and I knew that I could engage people in that domain using facts, figures, numbers, evidence. Whereas when I moved into different sectors and I started dealing with people, some of the challenges were more esoteric, and I needed to find different language to engage with them. They wanted to hear things in a very different way than, you know, here are the facts, here's the conclusion from those facts, and here's what we need to do next. They needed to be engaged in a very different way. And I found that quite a big challenge. And I guess that's kind of what you're saying as well.
Absolutely, and it's also it's helpful if you can, yeah, actually using simple language. So I generally, I don't like its jargon too much. I think it is not a good, when people sometimes, try to show the expertise just by using difficult words. That's not idea. I think it's always helpful to use simple language, and so that it can be understood to anyone, and that people can focus on the problems, not on the language or how you speak. But also, you are right, definitely. It's good to adjust the message, also depend on the who you talk to, because if you're an engineer and you talk to another engineer, of course this is different than if you talk to someone outside your area of expertise. And I think this is really crucial to communicate. And also in technology, in innovation, is particularly important, because there are a lot of really difficult problems, like in biotech or in high tech. The problems are very complex, and it's a big challenge how to explain them to people in such a way that they feel comfortable and that everyone understands. So I think this is really important, not to keep the jargon, and just to be communicative and simple language,
Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah, no. So I tend to find when I'm dealing with engineers, I tend to choose one sort of language. If I'm talking about sort of teams and how to build teams, I will talk to them about kind of how to be empowered, how to get transparency and visibility in the work that they're doing, how to build that intrinsic motivation by having a clear goal, a clear vision that they're chasing.
Yeah.
But then if I'm talking to people in a kind of a senior leadership function, as much as they care about that stuff, and they do care about it, they care also about, well, where does the money come from? Where do I get security from? How do I control risks? How do I engage with others outside of it? And it's a very different choice of language that those people need to be able to understand those complex issues. And it's difficult to walk that line. I mean, I'm not sure I ever get it right, but it's a difficult line to walk.
No, absolutely. So different people care about different things. So that's very important. That not every information is has the same value for everyone. So as you say, engineer maybe doesn't care about the budget as much as CEO, but also I believe in simplicity. That. Because it's not the point to impress people with the language, but rather with, the important is the idea which you want to explain. So I just try to speak simple,
Yeah.
so that it's understandable for everyone. I think this is good, and just clarity in the communication. That's actually one of the things which I learned when I moved to industry, which is very simple and banal, but it's actually funny, because when you are academic, you write very long emails, and when you move to industry, you learn how to do this, how to shorten your sentence, how to stick to the point exactly, because everyone is very busy, and it's just very inefficient if people, write very, huge messages. Yes, so that's funny. That's one of the things I've learned when I moved to industry.
Yeah, I mean, quite a
Short
few.
messages, short emails. Yes.
I think a lot of my emails have got kind of a almost like an executive summary. Here's like the top 3 bullet points. This is what we need to do, or whatever.
Exactly, that's exactly what you need, because I mean, if you want to read some huge amount of text, it's better to read books, I think. But when you communicate with people, I think bullet points, I'm very big fan. It's just, it just gives also clarity. Exactly what do you want? Also, when people communicate with me, I prefer, clarity and short message, and know exactly what is the problem without, some huge essays,
Yeah.
because it's huge time, and sometimes it's very difficult to, also in marketing I see this a lot actually, because I work a lot with marketing for technology, and this is also one of the problems, yes, that people they take too much text, too much explanation, and that nobody has time to analyze this. So you have to stick to the point exactly as fast as possible, and a short message, and
Yeah. I
clear.
think you've got different audiences, because quite often I actually want to dive a little bit deeper. It's like, yes, I accept your conclusion, but I'd
Yes,
also like to understand it a bit more. So I think you've got different people have got maybe different needs.
yes, I agree with you, but that's only if you engage in the communication further, you are interested in the topic, that makes sense
Yeah.
to have deeper discussion. But I always think that it's good to start simple, and and just not to overwhelm people with the information. And then,
I,
of course, if something is worth discussing, then you can also have a call or just a conversation.
I
But
think that's a really important point as well. That if you want to get something complex across, then you need to choose the right communication medium, right? Talking
absolutely,
about it is so much better than trying to write it down.
I fully agree with you. I think for long messages, talking, even the phone call is much better. And I generally also believe a lot. I don't like meetings with too many people at the same time, because I think this is also not very productive. I mean, it really depends, but it's just much better sometimes just to call someone, or just to have a quick chat, um, face to face, and then you can solve a lot of things much faster than having also long meetings, or with many people.
So I'm
Let them.
smiling when you said about meetings, because a friend of mine, Matt, Matt, you better be watching this. But Matt would often describe meetings as being a forum for one person to ask someone else to agree to something in front of witnesses, rather
Yeah,
than it being an opportunity to learn more and gather. So those are kind of workshops or working group sessions, which I think are so much more valuable than me standing up in front of a group of people and saying, "This is what we're going to do. Do you agree?" And it's like, well, that could have been an email, definitely.
I fully agree with you. I think if something can be solved by email, you should always choose. It should be always chosen as a first choice. And yes, and the meetings are often like lectures at university, which is very very difficult to focus, because this is not engaging. Because I think that people are engaged if they do something, if they take part in the conversation, or they do whatever they do, then they engage. But just sitting and listening is not productive, I think. And yeah, it's
No,
not.
we
And
have to be.
meetings usually like this, yes, because of course not every. It's hard if you have 20 people that they all of them will talk a lot. So usually, as you said, this is one or two people talking and the rest listening. So this is, I think
So
it's.
a curveball question for you. So looking at your background in neuroscience, and I think it's psychology background as well. Is that correct? Or
Actually, the psychology, not. I'm a big fan of psychology, but I have absolutely no education in this, so it's just a hobby. I have no formal background. It's pure neuroscience by on the biology side, so more about biological process which is happening in the brain, not psychology. It's not just to say.
so in that case, I'll reframe that question then. So from a neurology or a neuroscience point of view,
Yes.
um, when we're under like heavy load, heavy stress, are there any kind of shortcuts that you're aware of? And so I recognize in myself that if I'm under heavy stress, there are things that I might be able to do to maybe shortcut or circumvent those states in my mind. Is there anything that you've maybe learned which is like a really good coping mechanism for even recognizing when you're in a different state of mind?
You mean
Maybe
when
that's
you
more maybe that's more psychology than neuroscience, but I just wondered if you had any insights.
No, there is actually a lot of research also in neuroscience. People try to answer questions related to stress because you said overwhelmed. So it's basically what you're saying, it's stress. Yes, is that correct?
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it.
Okay, so yes, this is huge topic, very very huge, and there is a lot of things. There are actually many methods. I think this is currently very hot topic, and many people, which is actually under the mental health area. So yes, there is a lot of mechanism with which you can cope with stress. So there is many ways, but from my experience, what really help is, for example, prioritizing, because you have to know what is important, what is not, and I think this really help a lot when you have like a lot of things on your list. There is always something what is less important, so you shouldn't worry that much. So I think, at least for me personally, I can say what works for me, which is not a solution for everyone, but for me this works, like prioritizing. Then I usually focus on one thing which is the most important at the moment, and I think this is really tricky, especially when you work on multiple projects. What I have noticed is extremely overwhelming when you try to think about everything at the same time. It's just too much. So you need to put some kind of mentally, I don't know, some kind of blocks in your mind that you say, okay, today, now I'm thinking about this project and I'm not thinking about any other, because you want, because this is extremely overwhelming, I think, especially when you have a lot of different things going on in parallel. So I would say prioritizing, but also kind of like when you focus on one thing, then you focus only on this, and you don't think about other projects and other potential problems you might have at the same time. This is extremely helpful, at least from my experience. And so that's prioritizing. And then also what we talked before about the things which you can control and you cannot control. This is
Yeah.
extremely helpful as well, because when you work on some projects, you don't, if there is something you cannot control, you shouldn't waste your energy to be stressed about this. So this is also important, how to manage your energy, because and your attention in general during the day, because uh, we have only 24 hours. So and it's really important how we manage our time and our attention. So also we cannot be fully focused all day, like really deep focus or really like high quality thinking you cannot do for 10 hours per day. You usually maybe can do this 2-3 hours, or depends on the person. So it's really important to think what is the most important for you, and put your highest energy there, and really manage your attention. Yes, and try not to waste energy on things you cannot change or which are not important. I think it's just a matter of prioritizing. So it's good to think about it.
I don't know how true it is, but I've heard it said by quite a few people that human beings, we don't really multitask. We time slice. We don't have multiple threads running like a computer core might doing active tasks, and there's a cost for that change, right? So we often talk in my domain about limiting the amount of work that we're doing, both at a project level but also at an individual level. We call it like work in process. So how many things should we be working on? Ideally one, right? And have focus on that, because there's a cognitive load to switching between active tasks.
Yes, I think working on many projects at the same time is also, it's not so bad, because can be enriching if there is not too many projects, because this also it gives a fresh perspective, because when you focus on one topic all the time, then you just sometimes are close in this area, and you just don't get any fresh view. So that's why I believe working on different projects at the same time is not so bad. However, you are right, it should not be too many projects, definitely. So just should not be too many, but also I fully agree that multitasking is absolutely not a good idea. It's just you are less alert when you do many things. And I'm also generally big fan of switching off every type of notifications. I think this is also extremely helpful. That I always follow my agenda in a calendar. I have some plans for each day. It's every day different, but I think it's very bad to follow notification, because you also get distracted. So it's also switch off. If you have a deep focus on anything, then you get some message, some you completely are out of this. So then it's also, you have to come back again to your work after this distraction. I think it's not good, and it's also just waste of energy. But it's also it's good to because it's also, actually there are a lot of research in neuroscience about this about this instant gratification mechanism, and I think it's just it's something we have to work on, because we get used to this kind of messages, to likes or things which are like kind of instant for us, or some unexpected messages or emails. And it's good to just try to switch off these kind of things, and just to get used to not to wait for any messages, any just not to get distracted when we work. So just to focus on what you are doing at the moment. And
Yeah,
also like, yes, also like checking emails, for example, only in some particular time when it's good for you, not just when the message arrives, because it's really not necessary to answer within 5 minutes when you get an email, and it's not productive at all.
so I tend to talk when I'm working with teams. I would say exactly the same thing, right? So set a schedule up for checking your emails. So when I come in the morning, and then when I get a coffee after a couple of hours or an hour of focus, and times in between. No, that's my focus time. But also,
Absolutely.
yeah, it's really helpful to just kind of say also when you're dealing with people to say these things are non-real time communication. If you send me an email, if you send me a message, that's non-real time. If you need me real time, pick up the phone, we'll talk. And just
Yes.
setting those boundaries is really quite useful, especially with work from home, because we're
Yes.
constantly bombarded. And I reached my phone to kind of go, look, there's my dopamine right there. Ping, ping,
Exactly.
ping. Oh, you're important, Tim. Someone wants you. Or there's a
Exactly.
like on
I
your
feel
LinkedIn
bad when
post.
I get a lot of messages, because it makes you feel, oh yeah, yeah, so many people want to reach out, but it's not healthy. So it's better, just to detach from this, and when you have something to do, to focus, and you anyway check your emails every day, so you don't have to do this in real time, as you said. Yes, it's not.
Are there any ways to maybe try I don't know if you've come across it, but if you're kind of in this cycle of I must get the dopamine hit, from Candy Crush, from email, from Facebook, whatever. Have you found any good mechanisms for like getting away from that? Is it just like getting a distraction from that and focusing on something else, or
No, I think it's just a matter of training in this case. And, I'm talking from experience because there's a lot of research, but I cannot say this just from the top of my head. But I think it generally is the matter of habits. So you just, you should just get rid of habits of checking your phone too often. So this is something, for example, I'm still working on. But I have a lot. I do my best on that. So just to develop the habits, and just to like from my practical experience, it's good just to focus on what you can do. It's just more internal focus, not about which kind of message will arrive to you from other people, but just focus on what you are doing. uh, so it's just, I don't know how to explain this, but it's just the way of thinking. Just you should more focus on what you are producing than just reacting on other people.
I think,
So
yeah. For me, I was
so
going to say there's an element of mindfulness in there, doing things with intent.
maybe,
If you're picking up your phone, maybe even saying out loud, "Oh, I'm looking at Facebook again," just as a reinforcement, and maybe bring in another kind of pathway to be involved in that rather than it being just habit. You're actually doing it with awareness.
yes, yes, absolutely. And it's also just very easy content, because I've noticed it's also because, okay, I still use Facebook. It's not that I don't. But, it's very easy content. It's just the easiest thing you can ever do to not get bored is to open some quick messages, scroll. This is just very easy. You don't need any thinking for this. And it's a very easy way to uh, I don't know. You don't need a lot of to process this kind of information. So it's very easy entertainment, and it's easy to get used to this. So I think the best way is just to do some detox. Just not to use it for maybe a few weeks. Just to learn how to operate without this kind of short messages, or some kind of bad habits, with just taking away your attention, and it doesn't bring any value to you, because you just waste time on this. But it's very easy to get used, because it's also easy content, easy, like the short videos on TikTok. It's just a few seconds, so you don't need to focus on this. You don't need any attention. For reading books, for example, it's just very, very easy to consume such a content. And that's why I think the only way is just to, at least it worked for me, just not to use this kind of things for a few weeks, just learn how to live without using it. And then, maybe you can learn to use it occasionally, just maybe not every day, and not waste time, because it's a huge waste of time.
Yeah.
And just taking away the attention, which you could focus on something more valuable, and I don't know, some deep thinking, for example. So I think that just develop the habit of not using social media all the time. That's all the matter of habit, I think. Because also what I've been reading about, deep focus, because this is very valuable, actually, to be able to focus. And it's also sometimes difficult, especially when we have a lot of short messages around us. So it's very difficult sometimes to focus when we are used to short and very easy entertainment. So yeah, the best way is just to have blocks of time during your day, or maybe like switch off the phone during the weekend, just to get used to live without it. And I think it's a long term, it's very, very good.
Yeah, it's difficult though. I completely agree. I deleted Facebook a couple of months ago, and it's so hard to kind
I
of
know,
change
but
those habits.
everything. It's also hard to go to the gym every, I don't know, 3 times a week. But if you do this, you will feel better. So I think it's the same with the like psychological aspects. It's just this is difficult to develop, but if you do this, that you will feel better in long term. That's what I believe. At least can say from my experience.
No, that's awesome. I think probably a good time to ramp down and bring this to a close. But it's been great to speak to you, and I really appreciate your time. Some really interesting nuggets of wisdom and information in there. But before we call it to close, have you got any questions that you might want to ask of me at all, or no's great because that's fine.
No, I don't know. I don't have any particular question. How long do you do the podcast?
So this is our second session. So and as I say, just trying to draw in expertise from diverse areas. I had the opportunity to speak to a CFO a couple of weeks ago, which was
Yeah.
awesome, just to get their view of the world. Speaking to people like yourself as a neuroscientist, or someone generally from a scientific background, to understand a bit more about that space. And I think that there's so much more we can learn by getting these different diverse areas closer to the domain that I work in. So yeah, just hugely grateful. And if you've got any tips, or if you've got any ideas on who you would like to hear from, what is there a domain or area that you would like to hear about more from?
Well, I love to listen about technology. So actually, I'm a very big fan of podcasts. I think it's amazing,
Hmm.
amazing direction in general. In general, internet is fantastic for exchanging ideas. So I love it. And I love podcasts. I mainly focus, I like to listen about technology, about what is going on. Um, but I think it's a great idea. Also, actually, personal thoughts of some people are also good. Just even some experience from people who are maybe
Yeah.
doing similar things. Maybe they have similar problems. I think this is amazing. Absolutely fantastic way that we can exchange, with similar people, which maybe we would never meet in real life, of course.
Hmm.
But thanks to internet, we can just hear the ideas from all over the world, from people who maybe have similar interests or problems. So I really like it.
No, brilliant. Well, thanks, Ewelina. Thank you again for your time. And hopefully we can stay in contact, because this has been really lovely. So thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much also for the invitation. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is kind of like a little bit of an extra, because I wasn't actually, I was really ill. I did have like a prior commitment, but I ended up just being generally ill this week, so I was a little bit on catch up with your conversation. So it was a really interesting watch slash listen, Tim. I thought it was really cool. I mean, a question for you: what stood out to you? And I kind of run through what stood out to me, but it's kind of like, what did you take away from that?
So I thought it was really interesting to see the application of like the scientific method to ways of thinking, and I think that's something that we could probably do a much better job of when it comes to helping businesses. We often talk about, you know, our bets and managing risk by having smaller bets and stuff. If we modified our language a little bit and talked about those as hypotheses and used a scientific method to say, well, how am I going to test this hypothesis? I think we'd end up with a much healthier space. So that, for me, other than Ewelina's amazing knowledge and skills and her background and history, and I'd love to have dived deeper into some of the other stuff she's done in the past. Maybe we should get her back on and talk about some of those things. But yeah, that was one of the key things that stood out to me is, you know, using science for good.
Yeah, and it's been yeah, it's kind of that really resonated. What you just said was something, a couple of slides I put together for a bit of work I'm doing at the moment, which was around, you know, what are we trying to do here? We're trying to validate our assumptions, and the kind of the language that Ewelina was coming out with, which is again validating the assumptions that you go in with, using the what we call empirical data in order to kind of validate whether you're doing the right thing. Some of the things that stuck out to me was, and it was great for her to distinguish the difference between psychology and neuroscience, because I think people kind of like smash them hand in hand, like, you know, oh, it's the same thing. And actually, again, drilling into that kind of reason for neuroscience being, I put it down, like when I was making notes, I kind of put it down as almost the chemical side, like of why we act and do, and why we behave the way we behave because of the chemicals that are flowing through our brain, versus the psychology side, which I always think about is the thought patterns of behavior. It's kind of like, given the chemicals have reacted this way, these are the thought patterns that then start to kind of like force you to think in these different ways. So for me, it was kind of like there was some kind of really interesting things, kind of drawing the two, I guess separating the two, which were kind of cool. Something that stood out, and again, I love your post chat, love your thinking on, which is the difference between mental health and well-being.
That's a damn good question. I think actually we could maybe reframe that question and say health, right?
Yep.
I don't think you can, in a modern world, differentiate between physical and mental well-being, right? Whether that's because both have got such a deep tie to each other. I think, you know, I know I've had times in my life, and I'm not, you know, I'm a private person, but I'm not private about everything. You know, I've had challenging times. I've been through times of depression and challenge, and seen the impact they have on your physical health, and vice versa. When your physical health is low, the impact that has on your mental health. I think they're so intrinsically linked. It's maybe a false dichotomy to try and separate them and say, well, how do I help you to improve your mental health? It's like, how do I help you to improve your health as a holistic whole human being? I'm sorry for turning that question around, but
no. I think it's really important. I've been talking to people this week about the importance to me around physicality in my life. So whether that be creating a Lancaster bomber out of cardboard, as I have done the last couple of weeks, or going for a run, and listening to people kind of resonate. Oh yeah, you know, I like taking the dog for a walk. I like just getting out. I like rearranging my whole room, you know, just because I was stressed, you know, and those kind of things, how much it plays into. And I like the way you reframe that as just health, and that's the important bit, is kind of like looking after ourselves. Some of the other things that stood out for me, kind of like you were talking about the stress thing. I think one thing definitely for everyone to look up is that flow book that you mentioned, and I did try and look up the name, and maybe we can drop the link to the name because I had to Google it, which would be really
sadly. So I'm gonna butcher the name again. Mihai Csikszentmihalyi.
Yes, yeah.
Sadly, we lost him recently, actually, in the last year, but the work was really quite interesting, and his backstory was quite interesting as well. But it's super important to understand that kind of flow concept. When I know when you talk about flow, you're talking about, you know, the idea of work flowing from left to right. What we're actually talking about in this flow is my focus, you know, that peripheral disappearing.
Yeah, and I think, oh God, I feel like the need to jump in and defend myself.
No,
but I think when I wrote my book, but that was actually part of the consideration when I was trying to describe what flow is. I think I kind of in when I was describing flow in the book, I was talking about flow being this kind of almost mental state that you get into. There are lots of people who talk about flow. When I think about flow from a personal point of view, for those people who kind of have been out on a run, you know, kind of like running is part of your thing, or you're doing a physical sport, you get them once in a while. There are those moments where you're running and you've probably gone through a really terrible bit of effort and then all of a sudden something will happen and it will just feel effortless.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean.
You know what I mean? But something will click and you'll just be running, or you'll be doing.
It doesn't have to be physical though. I mean, writing code, writing a book, even reading. I remember having a conversation with someone, and I overthink, right? And I'm a neurodiverse individual, and I do have a tendency to be overthinking, constantly overanalyzing. And it could be a challenge. But I was sitting down to dinner with someone, and they kind of looked at me as I was staring off into the middle distance, and they said, "What's on your mind? What are you thinking about?" And I had this realization: absolutely nothing. And it was bliss. It was absolute. I was just zoned into one thing in that moment, and nothing else was going on. And I think that I think we could probably borrow from Dan Pink's work around autonomy, mastery, and purpose, because I think that they are really closely linked. I think when we've got that autonomy, the mastery, and the purpose, that leads us towards having this flow, right? Because we can self-actualize. Well, we're now into hierarchy of needs, right? But self-actualizing and being owners of our own destiny. I think if you're not responsible for your own destiny and your own delivery of whatever that is, running, cooking, working, you're unlikely to get that flow state of you know, I've got total ownership here.
And this is where, like, you know, the kind of whole idea of personal challenge and having those objectives really help us. So a couple more things I wanted to bring up. I wrote down these words, and again, I just thought these were quite nice ways. So we always talk about kind of feedback loops. Oh God, I've forgotten all of them. Anyway,
like OODA or
yeah. Thank you. Gosh, how embarrassing! I used to train them as part of the BCS course, and I used to like be able to rattle off all of them and what they meant, and now I've just gone. So I wrote pivot, change, risk, evaluate, and validate. Were kind of just things that words that stuck out to me. Is kind of, again, it goes back into that empirical thing. And the final thing, well, there were probably potentially two. Something was around kind of like the meetings and the stress. And Nigel Baker wrote something quite interesting on LinkedIn, which was around when people provide feedback. It was almost kind of like in a meeting, or provide feedback from their perspective. It's actually very selfish, right? So if they're offering help, it's kind of almost from a very selfish point of view. And I still need to kind of validate that, kind of go back and have a think about that. But something that stuck out to me, which was something Ewelina said, which was around working together. Like, people always need help. It was funny. I was in my local Tesco. This lady was struggling, and I offered to help and do all these kind of things. And the cashier said, "Oh, thank you very much. You know, thank you very much for helping her," and all this kind of thing. And I just kind of, for me, it was just a natural thing to do. And I just said, well, you know, everybody needs help in their life. You know, everybody, you know, irrespective of how successful you feel people are doing, how successful you think they are, everybody needs support, help. Not all the time, right? But those times.
There's two things that you sprung there as you were talking about that came to mind. And they both come from the same person, the CEO that I had for a while. And he used to say a couple of things. One of those was, not all help is helpful, so pick and choose.
Yes.
So and that kind of comes back to that feedback where it's maybe a little selfish. Sometimes help is selfish, right?
Yeah.
Let me help you get that done.
And this was
That's not.
And this was, yeah, thank you, because that's that was the thing Nigel Baker was picking up on is the reason I'm offering you help is, from my perspective, almost selfish. And again, I'm not discrediting Nigel and what he was saying, and I because I think that's what he was trying to get across.
No, and I think it's okay to accept help. I mean, I think it's obviously okay to accept help, but it's also okay to decline help and say, well, thank you for the offer. If I need your help, I'll come back to you. And the same, I think, is probably true about feedback, right? That sometimes feedback can be selfish. I want you to change your way of interacting with the world because it helps me. So I would often say feedback is a gift, but keep the receipt. You can return it for store credit. Because, you know, I want to hear your views and opinions, but I don't have to act on everything, right? I'm comfortable in my own self. I'm comfortable being me. Some of the things I do may make others, well, hopefully not uncomfortable, but may push the boundaries of what people expect from me. And I'm pleased to hear their feedback, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to immediately adopt it and become a different person or act in a different way. Just because I get a sample size of one, right? Doesn't make a good sample size.
Yeah, and so I just think that's really important to recognize. There's a class we've started trialing called Scrum Master 3.0, which is all around feedback, and it really is genuinely all around feedback. And one of the things I was kind of feeding back on is giving feedback on the class, which was we actually need to spend more time in that, being able to recognize and figure out how to respectfully give and receive feedback and what that actually means for the person, because it's so important.
You should have a look at some of the work of Kerry Newton Sagana, who's been doing some work in that space. And I've heard a couple of podcasts from her around, so pardon the language, the delivery of shit sandwiches, where I'm saying it's just really an ineffective way of delivering feedback, right? Because it triggers the wrong parts of your psyche when you get that. So some really interesting stuff that she's doing in that space, and also this kind of concept of a thing called like micro retrospecting. So more frequently gaining feedback through retrospecting questions, which is a really quite powerful way of looking at it. You know, if it's good to get feedback after 2 weeks, if you're working Scrum and doing sprints, well, it's probably good to get feedback after some sort of interactional session. So that said, how's this session going for you, Andy?
Well, no, and this is good because I think well, you just got me thinking about kind of the purposeful of having kind of living retrospectives, that kind of ideas as you go through whatever your iteration length, whether you're doing Scrum or not, okay, but your iteration length, actually spending time to capture feelings, thoughts, incidents, being able to then go back and reflect on, did that, you know, help us, did that hinder us as a team, me personally, on all those really, really good things. I mean, so, you know, going back to the chat, there was so much in there to unpack, so much in there, some really important things about dealing with stress, some really, really important things about taking things. I'm going to label it under the taking things personally and holding them. There's that whole people about giving. There's that whole saying around giving people free rent to your brain. You know, not allowing people and thoughts to live with you in the moment to distract you and stress you. And you know, again, you kind of talked about ways to kind of break that. Interesting, I've got somebody potentially lined up for another chat. We were having a chat earlier, so I think we can probably bring in that. But anyway, so for me, another really, really good one, really, really interesting. And thank you, you know, for lining that up. It's really cool.
Yeah, and I think for our audience as well, we should try and remember where we're posting this. Please use the comments below to put your questions. Hit the like and subscribe button. I've been practicing. What can I say?
It's good. It's down there. But yeah, we need to get the links. So the books, the two books, the flow book and the other book you just mentioned, or any kind of link to the feedback info would be really, really cool. I think for people watching this.
I'll drop it into the body. So actually, by the time this goes on live, it will be in the description of the video, and there'll be links there for people to follow.